Hello, everyone. Welcome back for week 13 as we focus on providing feedback. And this week, we're going to take a look at the question, how can we let learners know how they are performing? Our learning objective this week is to develop some strategies to provide feedback for learners. All right, I'm sure those of you that work in education, you're probably really used to feedback and giving feedback. But today, we're just going to talk about a few different strategies that hopefully either add to that repertoire or help develop it a little more. Specifically, we're going to talk about how to keep things simple when we're talking feedback. We're going to talk operant conditioning. We're going to talk about what smart feedback is, as well as things like growth mindset and peer feedback. All right, first, let's talk about keeping things simple, right? Everyone has a different cognitive capacity. The gears in their head turn a different way, so to speak. So it's important to remember our learners have limits on their working memory and their cognitive load processing, right? So we can't give them too much information when we're giving feedback. We want to try to keep things simple. What does that mean? First off, let's isolate feedback when possible. Okay? Isolate means let's focus on one thing at a time. In coaching, we really talk about when you're helping a player, try not to give them everything they did wrong at once, right? Try to give them one thing to work on, one thing to get better at, and let's isolate that feedback so they can practice that one skill. And then once we fix that, we can look at the next piece. Okay, so that's my first bit of advice is isolate that feedback whenever possible. Next, we want to check for understanding before giving more, right? This should seem like common sense. Once we give that isolated feedback on a specific skill, we want to make sure they've understood. We want to make sure our learner can now execute that skill given the feedback before we proceed to the next thing. Okay, so after you give that isolated feedback, check for understanding. And then finally, okay, this should be kind of all communication, right? We want to speak simply and clearly. Okay, if we want our learners to understand the feedback we're giving them, we want to speak in their terms as simply and as clearly as possible. Another strategy for giving feedback is operant conditioning. Okay, a lot of you have probably heard of this from the field of behaviorism, right? Operant conditioning is giving feedback in such a way that we're either increasing or decreasing a behavior. If it's something we like our learners doing, we would reinforce that behavior. Or if it's something maybe you don't like them doing and you want to train them not to do it, that would be considered punishment. Okay, and in operant conditioning, there's two ways we can either reinforce or punish a behavior. Okay, we're either adding something to the situation or we're removing something. We're taking it away. Okay, and the way it's termed in operant conditioning is either positive or negative. Okay, so a positive reinforcement is when we're encouraging a good behavior by adding something to the situation. So when you're telling someone that they did a good job, okay, in the example we have giving a dog a treat when it sits, right? If you're rewarding someone with UNR bucks or UNR points, right? If your school does that kind of thing, the PBIS systems, that is an example of positive reinforcement. Okay, so when we're giving feedback, a lot of times we want to do that positive reinforcement. Hey, you did a really good job on this part of the essay. You did a really good job on this part of the problem. Okay, the flip side of that, negative reinforcement, is when you're taking something away to encourage that good behavior, right? You did a good job on level 1. Let's try it without the extra help this time. Right? We're removing that scaffolding so that the learner can try it on their own. That would be an example of negative reinforcement. We're removing something to encourage this good behavior. Okay, on the flip side, we have positive punishment and negative punishment. The idea here is that we're either adding or removing some stimulus so that way we can decrease the behavior. Okay, so positive punishment might be giving a student feedback on something they're doing that they need to maybe do less, okay? Right? Hey, didn't quite like this part of the essay, maybe let's work on that. Or, hey, I noticed you're setting up your problem this way, maybe we try it this way instead, right? That would be an example of positive punishment. We're trying to decrease the behavior that's going on by adding something to the situation, in this case, our feedback. And then there's also the other side, the negative punishment, where we're removing something to try to decrease that behavior. But I think when we're talking feedback, we're really talking about positive reinforcement. If students are doing a good job on something and you want them to keep doing it, that's positive reinforcement. Tell them that they're doing a good job and why it's a good job. Or we have positive punishment, okay? If students are doing something that's maybe not the best practiced, not something we want them to keep doing, tell them why. We can still do it in a nice way, right? We don't have to be rude. But we want to use that positive punishment to tell them, hey, maybe we need to add some sources here, or we need to tweak this line, or change how we're doing this activity, okay? But when you're thinking about feedback, think, am I reinforcing what my students are doing, or am I trying to punish them so that we can decrease that behavior, okay? Yeah, punishment might not be the best named term, but that's operant conditioning for you. Next up, we have the SMART feedback technique. SMART is also an acronym used for writing goals. I think it also fits when giving feedback. Okay? When we want to give someone feedback about how they're doing, we want to be specific. Okay? We want to isolate kind of what we're giving them feedback on. We want things to be measurable. What am I doing wrong and how do I do it differently, right? The student should understand how to make that measurable change. Achievable. If you're giving your students feedback on something, we want it to be something they're able to do. Okay, we don't want to tell them to be able to do something that they are not capable of doing. Okay, so we always want things to be achievable. Relevant. Okay, if you're giving a learner feedback on your specific training, right, about a specific skill, maybe that skill should be relevant to the training. That skill should be relevant to the job, right? If things are irrelevant, then they're not really going to put too much stock into that feedback, okay? So we always want things to be relevant when possible. And lastly, timely. Okay, a lot of times this is, the T is for time-based, but I like timely here. We want our feedback to come at the right time, right? When students are working on a problem or a project and it's fresh in their head and they're turning these ideas around in their working memory, that's a great time to give them feedback and help them kind of figure out how to do something properly. Maybe next week or a month later is not the best time anymore, right? So giving that feedback when it's still fresh in their mind is always what you should be shooting for. Kind of that timely feedback. If you're giving them feedback so far in advance that they can't really use it to do a better job on the next project or the next assignment, right, that might be an issue. So there's SMART feedback for you: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. Okay, the next strategy I wanted to talk about is called growth mindset. This was really popular in the public schools a few years ago, so I'm sure some of you have worked with it or heard about it. But just to put it quickly, growth mindset is the idea that we want to keep in mind the idea that we're not going to learn everything overnight, right? We're not going to wake up and suddenly become better at this skill, right? You have to work at it and grow at it and develop, right? You can see in the picture, we start as that seedling, right? That's an amateur at this skill. And we want to develop into that full plant, into someone that's proficient. So how do we go from amateur to proficiency? Well, we kind of work at it bit by bit and get better over time. And growth mindset is about reflecting that in our language and how we give feedback to students. Okay, so starting off, we want to use optimistic language. Okay, it's very important in growth mindset that you don't ever tell someone that something is unobtainable or too difficult, right? Oh, you're struggling on this concept? We'll get there. You'll get there eventually. You'll learn it if you keep practicing, right? We want to be optimistic. Everyone can learn in a growth mindset. Okay, no one is cut off from any knowledge. And this is how I like to think about a lot of things, especially as a math teacher. This was a big one. My job was to teach math first and foremost, but to teach this growth mindset second, and to show students that if they wanted to be successful at math, they could be. To show them if they wanted to learn this, they could. And how to build that and build that community, that's growth mindset. That's what we're practicing. So starting off, we want to use that optimistic language. We always can do something, even if we need more practice. It's possible to do it at some point, right? If we keep working, we will get there eventually, right? We're staying optimistic. We recognize that learning is a process with stages. Okay, you might not be at stage 5 of solving this problem. You might be at the amateur stage, and that's okay. We're going to get better and better, and you're going to get to the next stage and the next one, and eventually you'll get to where you need to be. Okay, but learning is not a on-off switch. There's stages, there's steps to that process, and that's okay. We also want feedback to nurture that learning process. Okay, we want students to develop. We want to kind of nurture them along and to understand that as long as we keep working at this learning process, we'll get there, right? We're trying to create this mindset in the learner with our feedback whenever possible. And finally, I wanted to talk about peer feedback, right? It does not always have to be the instructor or the trainer that is giving the feedback, right? It can be their peers. Whether these are working colleagues, working professionals, students, right? It doesn't matter. At any level, our peers can give feedback to one another, right? And this might happen, you might partner students up or partner colleagues up and have them work on a project together and give feedback along the way. You might have group discussions, right? In person, having people talk about things and sharing their ideas and what they think works and doesn't work and giving feedback on different things. Another way is discussion boards, which you've seen in this class and happens a lot in these online courses where our peers are communicating with one another, bouncing ideas off in that digital forum. But I think the biggest thing to keep in mind, no matter which of these strategies you're implementing, is to give learners structure. Okay, think about as the instructional designer, what do you want these learners giving each other feedback on? Right? What do you want them talking about? In today's lecture, I might care about operant conditioning, right? And we're having a discussion on operant conditioning, and I really want you guys as learners to give each other feedback based on positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement and that sort of thing, right? Give them a specific spot to kind of look at. Or notice when we did the writing development, I wanted you to focus on the writer's ability to chunk information into parts. Okay, I'm trying to give you some structure to focus on, so that way when you're giving feedback, it relates to the content that we're working on. Okay, so we're talking peer feedback. There's lots of strategies out there, but my biggest piece of advice is give learners structure so they know what content we're focusing on, and that way everything's still tied into the lesson of the day. All right, so that's what I have for you on providing feedback today. There'll be a few more internet links there if you want to extend your learning on things like operant conditioning or peer feedback. There'll be some articles that you can read up on. But as far as the actual assignment this week, we are starting Project 4. Okay, so there'll be no knowledge check this week, so you guys can really get started on this and kind of plan out what you want to do. But in Project 4, you're going to be creating and presenting a multimedia presentation on a training or consulting concept. Okay, so all semester, we've been working on developing this idea for a training or consulting concept. In your final presentation, you're going to kind of put it all together and present it to us as as a class. So we're going to apply the ADDIE model first to plan the training. Okay, a lot of you have already done this in project 1 and 2. Okay, if you'd like to pivot to a different project, that's totally fine as well. Okay, but first and foremost, we use ADDIE to plan things, and then we use that ADDIE model to develop materials. Okay, and that's what you did in project 3. Okay, so for project 4, we're going to construct a multimedia presentation, kind of detailing everything, how we used ADDIE, and the different steps and parts. And then we're going to present that information in a clear and direct fashion. Okay, so this is the goal for project 4. However, one potential issue did come up when we're talking presentations, right? This is an asynchronous course, so we haven't really met at a given time at all this semester. I thought I would ask you guys if there's a good time we could all meet and do presentations together, but as you can see, we're pretty evenly distributed, right? Some people can meet this day or that day, but there's not really a good day where a lot of us can meet. Okay, this was checking on the survey when we had 11 participants. So you can see we didn't have any days where even half of our participants could make it. So not ideal. However, I also asked you guys if you've taken the survey. I know some people hadn't yet, but that's okay. I asked if you were comfortable recording and posting your final presentation if we couldn't find a day that worked for everyone. And everyone has said yes so far. Okay. So I think we're going to pivot to that, and we're going to do a recorded final presentation, and then we'll post it on that discussion board so everyone can kind of check out each other's presentations. But I think we're going to go in this direction instead, just because it's a lot easier for everyone to make it work. I know you guys are really busy as finals come up, so let's do it this way. We'll record and we'll post it, and call it good. So first off, project 4. Okay, it's going to have an official due date of 12/12. Okay. And we're going to create a video presentation detailing how you applied the ADDIE model to create a training this semester. And we'll go through the rubric here in a moment, but the focus is on the ADDIE model. So obviously we're going to grade on analysis, design, development, implementation, evaluation, right? That ADDIE process. Each step in the process gets 20 points. Okay, and we can take a look at that next. Starting off first with analysis. I would like you in your presentations to identify the stakeholders of your training and to describe their needs. I'd like you to define any possible limitations. Identify some potential useful technologies. Propose a type of training, right? What type of training are you going to do and why? And then finally, to show a quick logic model summarizing your training proposal. Okay, now if you're doing the same setup as you were doing for project 1, you can absolutely use that logic model. Okay, we built it kind of for this project. If you pivoted to another project or another training scenario, that's okay. Just kind of make some tweaks so that you can show me a logic model here. But this is what I will be looking for when I'm grading kind of the analysis section of your video. Next up, we have the design stage. Okay, once again, 20 points. And I'll be looking at, did you present your training learning objectives? Okay, a few people struggle with these in, I believe it was project 2. So remember, when we're talking learning objectives, I want to be able to see the conditions, performance, and criteria of your students, right? What are you looking for them to be able to perform, and to what level when we're talking learning objectives? I would like you to provide information on your instructional strategy, right? What strategy are you using and why? Right? That should be included in the design section of your video. Also, I'd like you to include a slide on pace and structure, right? What pace and structure are you deciding? Why are you deciding to go with that pace and structure, right? That sort of thing. Next, we're going to include a written outline. Okay, so you're going to show off a written outline, kind of an overview of that training activity, as well as a storyboard excerpt for the activity. Okay, so you don't have to show a full storyboard here. One slide just showing kind of that you built the storyboard is fine. You're allowed to use the storyboard from project 2. Okay, so once again, these projects are trying to build up into this project 4. Okay, but that's what I'll be looking for the design section of project 4. Next up, development. Once again, 20 points. This one you can pull from project 3 if you'd like, but I would just like to see 2 examples of your training materials, right? You're designing this training. Just show me 2 examples of materials, whether that's a written excerpt, whether that's a slide, a video snippet, kind of whatever you have. Just show me some examples of the training materials you're developing for this training scenario. Okay, and that's all we have there for the development. When it comes to implementation, I'll be looking for you to describe an appropriate pilot group for this training. Okay, so you built your training. Maybe before we go live, how can we test it? What would an appropriate pilot group look like? I would like you to address how students are going to access training materials, right? That accessibility standpoint. How are they going to interact with their training materials? How will they download them, access them, that sort of thing. I'd like you to talk about your communication strategy with students and provide some rationale there, right? We talked about communication one week. Are you going to do announcements? Are you going to call all your participants on the phone, right? What are you going to do and why on the communication front? And finally, I'd like you to include a sample communication script. If you're going to send out an announcement, if you're going to do a phone call, just show us an example of what this might look like in a quick script or example there. And finally, we have the evaluation stage, which is also 20 points. In the evaluation stage, I would like to see your strategy on formative assessment. Right, we're going to present our learner formative assessment strategy and give rationale there, as well as the summative assessment strategy. Okay, we'll talk more about those 2 in the next few weeks. Okay, but we want strategies on how to assess our learners. Is learning taking place? And we want to know that the day of as well as at the end of the training, which is the formative and summative piece. We're going to describe how learner feedback will be provided. Okay, so I'd like a slide just talking about how you're going to give feedback. What are you looking for to critique? Right? What might be a focal point of your feedback? Okay, so some information on that. We're going to talk about end of course surveys, and you're just going to show off a quick end of course survey for your training. And then finally, we're going to do a piece on how you know if the training was successful or not, right? I would like you to address, based on all your data, how do you know? Is this a good training? Is this a bad training? Based on your assessment, right? How can we evaluate the training as a whole? And that's what we're going to finish with there. Okay, so that is Project 4, our final presentation. Okay, remember we're going to make a video presentation. We're going to record it. You're going to post it online. YouTube's fine, or an alternative is fine, but we want to be able to just submit a link, ideally, to a discussion board. And like we talked about, we want to hit on the analysis phase, the design phase, development phase, and so on. Okay, so this is how I'm going to grade that final presentation. Obviously, like always, feel free to stop by office hours if any of this is confusing. Feel free to write me either in Canvas or an email if you have any questions. But this is kind of the goal. Is where we want to finish with the course, is this final presentation. So really start to think about that. Remember, you have till December 12th, so we do have some time. But the more you can get ironed out this week, kind of the less you'll have on your plate moving into finals. So really, I would suggest starting work on that this week if possible. Okay, so that's what I have for you guys. You have a wonderful week. And as always, let me know if you need anything.